The question he asked that night changed my entire life. I did not hear it when he first said it. At least, not clearly. The world around me felt distant, blurred by rain and exhaustion. Cold water dripped from the edge of a bus stop shelter and splashed onto the empty sidewalk beside me. Cars passed through the city streets, their headlights stretching into long ribbons of white and gold across the wet pavement. I remember staring at those lights and wondering how a place so crowded could suddenly feel so lonely. My name is Emily Parker, and until that night, I believed I could solve every problem on my own. I had spent years helping other people through difficult days at the community center where I worked. I listened. I encouraged. I stayed late whenever someone needed support. Yet somehow, when my own life became complicated, I found myself standing alone in the rain with nowhere left to go. The wind pushed against my coat. My hands trembled from the cold. I kept telling myself to take one more step. Then another. Then another. But eventually even that felt impossible. I sat down beneath the shelter and closed my eyes for just a moment. The city noise faded. Tires hissed against wet roads. Distant sirens echoed somewhere downtown. Everything felt far away. Then I heard the sound of a car slowing nearby. At first I ignored it. Expensive cars drove through this neighborhood every day without stopping. This one stopped. A door opened. Footsteps approached. Slow. Measured. Confident. I looked up. A tall man stood several feet away beneath a black umbrella. The streetlights reflected off the rain around him. Even through my exhaustion, I recognized him immediately. Dominic Moretti. His name appeared in newspapers, business magazines, and charity events across the city. Some people admired him. Others feared him. Most people avoided talking about him entirely. Yet there he was, standing on an ordinary sidewalk on an ordinary rainy night, looking directly at me. He studied my face for a moment. Not with judgment. Not with pity. With concern. Genuine concern. Then his gaze shifted toward the condition I was in. His expression hardened slightly. Not toward me. Toward something else. Something only he understood. The people standing behind him seemed to notice the change immediately. The atmosphere around them became very still. Dominic took another step forward. Rain tapped softly against the umbrella above him. His voice, when he finally spoke, was calm and controlled. Who touched her? The question carried through the rain like a stone dropped into quiet water. I blinked in confusion. No one answered. The man behind him remained silent. Dominic looked at me again. His expression softened immediately. Can you stand? He asked. I tried. My legs disagreed. Embarrassment rushed into my cheeks. Before I could apologize, Dominic removed his coat and draped it gently across my shoulders. The warmth surprised me. So did the kindness. You do not have to explain anything tonight, he said. You just need to get out of the rain. I should have refused. Every sensible thought told me not to trust a stranger, especially one as powerful as Dominic Moretti. Yet something in his voice felt steady. Safe. For the first time all evening, I felt like someone actually saw me. Then Dominic glanced down at the silver pendant hanging from a chain around my neck. His eyes widened slightly. The color drained from his face. And in a voice barely above a whisper, he spoke a name I had never heard before. The name meant nothing to me. I watched Dominic Moretti stare at the silver pendant around my neck as though he had seen a ghost. Rain continued falling beyond the car windows while the city slowly disappeared behind us. I sat in the back seat wrapped in his coat, still trying to understand why one of the most powerful men in the city had stopped for a stranger. Dominic sat across from me, silent for most of the drive. Not distant. Thoughtful. Every few minutes his eyes returned to the pendant. Each time, the same expression crossed his face. Recognition. By the time we arrived at his estate, exhaustion weighed heavily on me. The property stretched across several acres overlooking the river. Warm lights glowed through tall windows. The house looked less like a residence and more like something preserved from another era. Stone walls. Iron gates. Massive oak trees swaying in the wind. Everything felt unreal. Dominic opened the door himself and motioned for me to enter. No questions. No demands. Just quiet patience. Inside, the warmth immediately wrapped around me. A fire burned in a large stone fireplace. Soft music drifted through distant hallways. Someone offered tea. Another person brought dry clothes. The entire household moved with calm efficiency, as though helping people was the most natural thing in the world. An hour later I sat alone in a guest suite overlooking the gardens. Rain tapped softly against the glass. For the first time all evening, I felt safe enough to breathe normally. A gentle knock interrupted my thoughts. Dominic stood outside the door holding a small wooden tray with a cup of tea. The sight surprised me. Men like him probably had dozens of employees who could have delivered it. Yet he carried it himself. "May I come in?" he asked. I nodded. He placed the tray on a nearby table and sat across from me. For several moments neither of us spoke. Then his gaze drifted toward the pendant again. "Where did you get it?" The question finally arrived. I looked down at the silver piece resting against my sweater. "My mother gave it to me." Dominic remained perfectly still. "Before she passed away?" I nodded slowly. "She told me never to sell it. Never to throw it away. No matter what happened." Something shifted in his expression. Not surprise this time. Emotion. Brief. Controlled. But real. "What was your mother's name?" he asked quietly. "Laura Parker." The room fell silent. Dominic looked away toward the fire burning in the fireplace. For the first time since meeting him, he seemed uncertain. Almost as though he had hoped for a different answer. Finally he stood and walked toward one of the bookshelves built into the wall. After a moment he removed an old photograph hidden between several books. He stared at it before turning it toward me. My breath caught immediately. The woman standing beside a younger version of Dominic's father looked exactly like my mother. 25 years younger. Smiling. Standing beside a large brick building covered in ivy. My heart began racing. "Where did you get this?" I whispered. Dominic looked directly into my eyes. "That is the same question I was about to ask you." Then he pointed toward the pendant resting against my chest. "Because that necklace belonged to the woman standing next to your mother. And she disappeared 25 years ago." The photograph remained in my hands long after Dominic stopped speaking. I stared at my mother's smile, trying to reconcile the woman I knew with the mystery now unfolding in front of me. Growing up, my mother rarely spoke about her past. Whenever I asked about old friends or old jobs, she would smile gently and change the subject. I had always assumed the memories were painful. Now I wondered if they had been important. Dominic sat quietly across from me, allowing me time to process what I had just learned. The fire crackled softly between us. Outside, the storm continued moving across the estate. "Who was she?" I finally asked, pointing to the woman standing beside my mother. Dominic looked toward the photograph. "Her name was Sophia Bennett." The name felt unfamiliar. Yet the moment he said it, I noticed something I had missed before. Sophia wore a necklace identical to the pendant hanging around my neck. My pulse quickened. "You are sure?" Dominic nodded. "I have seen that necklace in photographs my entire life." I looked down at the pendant. It suddenly felt heavier than before. "What happened to her?" Dominic leaned back slowly. "No one knows." The answer surprised me. Men like Dominic always seemed to have answers. Yet his voice carried genuine uncertainty. 25 years ago, Sophia helped establish a charitable organization with my father and several other people. Then one day she disappeared from public life. I glanced back at the photograph. And nobody looked for her? A faint smile crossed Dominic's face. Many people did. His expression grew thoughtful. Including my father. Something about the way he said it caught my attention. There was history there. Emotion. Respect. Dominic stood and walked toward another bookshelf. This time he removed a leather folder secured with a faded ribbon. He carried it carefully, as though it contained something valuable. My father kept this until the day he died. He placed the folder on the table. I have never opened it. I blinked. Never? He shook his head. He left instructions. Dominic's gaze met mine. Open only if the pendant returns. Silence filled the room. The words sent a chill through me despite the warmth of the fire. The pendant returns. Not appears. Returns. As though someone had always expected it to come back. Dominic carefully untied the ribbon and opened the folder. Inside rested several old documents, photographs, and a sealed envelope. The paper had yellowed with age. Across the front, written in elegant handwriting, were 6 simple words. For the person wearing Sophia's pendant. Neither of us spoke. My heart pounded loudly enough to drown out the storm outside. Dominic slowly slid the envelope toward me. I think this belongs to you. My hands trembled as I picked it up. The paper felt fragile beneath my fingertips. Whoever wrote it had expected someone to find it decades later. Somehow that person believed the necklace would return. Somehow they believed I would be sitting here tonight. Carefully, I broke the seal. Inside rested a single folded letter and a small brass key attached to a blue ribbon. The sight of the key immediately drew my attention. It looked old. Deliberately preserved. I unfolded the letter. The handwriting matched the words on the envelope. My eyes moved to the first sentence. Then my breath caught. Because the letter did not begin with Sophia's name. It began with my mother's. Laura, if Emily is reading this, then our promise finally kept itself. My hands tightened around the letter as I stared at the first sentence. Laura, if Emily is reading this, then our promise finally kept itself. For a moment I forgot where I was. The fireplace. The storm. Dominic sitting across from me. Everything seemed to fade into the background. All I could see was my mother's name written by someone who had known her long before I was born. My pulse echoed loudly in my ears as I continued reading. Dear Laura, if Emily has found this letter, then she is old enough to learn the truth. Not every truth. Only the one that matters. I swallowed hard. Dominic remained silent beside me. He understood this was no longer his story. It was mine. The handwriting flowed neatly across the page. 25 years ago, we created something together. Not a company. Not a fortune. Something more important. A place where people could begin again when life convinced them they could not. I paused and looked up. Dominic noticed the confusion on my face. Keep reading, he said quietly. I returned to the letter. If Emily is reading this, then the silver pendant found its way home. That means the key must do the same. The brass key resting beside the letter suddenly felt significant. Deliberate. Planned. The writer continued. The key opens a room hidden inside Whitmore House. There you will find the answers we could not leave behind anywhere else. My breath caught. Whitmore House. The name sounded familiar. Dominic reacted immediately. His expression changed the moment he heard the words. You know it? I asked. He nodded slowly. My father used to visit there several times a year. What is it? Dominic looked toward the rain beyond the window. An old foundation building north of the city. His eyes returned to me. Closed to the public for decades. The room grew quiet again. I looked back at the letter. The final paragraph waited at the bottom of the page. Emily, if you were standing beside Dominic Moretti while reading this, then his father kept his promise too. Trust him. He will understand why Whitmore House matters. Emotion tightened my throat. My mother had written those words for a future she would never see. Somehow she had known. Or hoped. The letter ended with a simple signature. Sophia Bennett. I lowered the page slowly. The woman in the photograph. The owner of the pendant. The person everyone believed had disappeared. Yet she had been connected to my mother all along. Dominic stood and walked toward the window. Rain continued falling across the gardens below. My father never stopped looking for answers about Sophia, he said quietly. Not once. I glanced toward him. Why? Dominic hesitated. Then he gave an answer I did not expect. Because she saved his life. The statement hung in the air between us. Another mystery. Another secret waiting beyond the next door. I looked down at the brass key resting on the table. Small. Ordinary. Yet somehow powerful enough to connect two families across 25 years. Dominic turned back toward me. Determination had replaced uncertainty in his eyes. Whitmore House is about 60 miles from here. My heart immediately began racing. You want to go tonight? A faint smile appeared. No. He looked toward the storm outside. Tonight we rest. Then his gaze settled on the key. Tomorrow morning, we find out why your mother and Sophia spent 25 years waiting for you to open a door. The storm had disappeared by morning. Sunlight poured across the gardens outside my window, transforming the estate into something completely different from the place I had arrived at the night before. Everything looked calm. Peaceful. As though the rain had washed away more than clouds. Yet the questions waiting inside my mind felt heavier than ever. The silver pendant rested on the nightstand beside the brass key. I stared at both while getting ready. One connected me to a woman I had never met. The other connected me to a place I had never seen. Somehow both seemed connected to my mother. An hour later I joined Dominic in the dining room. Large windows overlooked the river beyond the property. Sunlight reflected across the water in long ribbons of gold. Dominic sat at the far end of the table reviewing several documents. He looked up when I entered. Did you sleep? The simple question surprised me. A little. A faint smile appeared. Better than yesterday? I nodded. Much better. For a moment neither of us mentioned Whitmore House. The pause felt oddly comfortable. Then Dominic closed the folder in front of him and stood. Ready? My pulse immediately quickened. We left shortly afterward. The drive north carried us away from the city skyline and into rolling countryside. Open fields stretched beyond the highway. Small towns appeared and disappeared along the route. The further we traveled, the more distant my normal life felt. 2 hours earlier I had been an ordinary woman trying to make sense of a difficult week. Now I was chasing secrets buried for 25 years. Dominic remained focused on the road. Occasionally he pointed out landmarks his father used to visit. The stories were simple. Honest. They revealed a side of him the newspapers never described. Not the powerful businessman. Not the feared public figure. Just a son remembering someone he respected. Around mid-morning we finally turned onto a narrow tree-lined road. The branches formed a canopy overhead. Sunlight filtered through the leaves in shifting patterns across the pavement. Then the building appeared. Whitmore House. My breath caught immediately. The structure stood on a hill overlooking acres of gardens and open fields. Ivy climbed the stone walls. Tall windows reflected the bright morning sky. The place looked timeless. Not abandoned. Preserved. Loved. Dominic parked near the entrance. Neither of us moved for several seconds. I could feel it. The strange certainty that this place mattered. the front door opened before we reached it. An elderly woman stepped outside and smiled the moment she saw me. Not Dominic. Me. As though she had been expecting this exact moment. "Emily Parker," she said warmly. My heart skipped. "How do you know my name?" Her smile deepened. "Because your mother told me you would come one day." Every question inside my head seemed to stop at once. The woman introduced herself as Eleanor Bennett. My pulse immediately accelerated. Bennett. The same last name as Sophia. She noticed my reaction and nodded gently. Sophia was my sister. The world seemed to tilt slightly beneath my feet. Eleanor stepped aside and motioned for us to enter. The interior of Whitmore House felt even more remarkable than the outside. Photographs lined the walls. Families. Graduates. Volunteers. Thousands of moments captured across decades. Then Eleanor led us into a quiet library and placed a worn leather journal on the table. Across the front, written in faded gold letters, was a name I recognized instantly. Laura Parker. My mother's journal. Eleanor rested her hand softly on the cover. Then she looked directly at me. "Everything started with what your mother wrote inside this book." My fingers trembled slightly as I reached for the journal. The leather cover felt worn from years of use, yet it had been preserved with extraordinary care. Almost reverence. The gold lettering spelling my mother's name had faded with time, but seeing it there still stole my breath. Laura Parker. For most of my life she had simply been my mother. The woman who worked long hours. The woman who remembered birthdays. The woman who always believed people deserved a second chance. Now every new discovery revealed another side of her. One she had never spoken about. Eleanor sat quietly across from me while Dominic remained near one of the tall windows overlooking the gardens. Neither interrupted. They understood this moment belonged to me. Carefully, I opened the journal. The first pages contained ordinary entries. Dates. Observations. Notes about community projects. Meetings. Families receiving assistance. Students earning scholarships. Yet the deeper I read, the more a pattern emerged. My mother was not simply volunteering. She was helping build something. Every entry carried the same underlying purpose. Opportunity. Hope. A place where people could rebuild their lives. Hours seemed to pass while I turned page after page. Then I found an entry marked with a folded ribbon. The handwriting looked hurried compared to the others. The date immediately caught my attention. 25 years earlier. The same year Sophia Bennett disappeared from public life. My pulse quickened. I began reading. Today Sophia made her decision. She believes stepping away is the only way to protect what we built. I do not agree, but I understand. We promised this foundation would never become about us. It must remain about the people who need it. I looked up sharply. She did not disappear? Eleanor exchanged a glance with Dominic before answering. No. The answer seemed to shift everything. Sophia chose privacy. I stared at her. Why would everyone believe she vanished? Eleanor smiled sadly. Because sometimes the truth is less dramatic than the stories people invent. I returned to the journal. The next several entries explained more. Sophia had helped create Whitmore House alongside my mother, Eleanor, and Dominic's father. Together they built a foundation dedicated to helping struggling families, students, and communities. Over time the organization expanded far beyond anything they expected. Then Sophia stepped away from public leadership. Not because of danger. Not because of scandal. Because she wanted the mission to survive without becoming dependent on any one person. I leaned back slowly. Years of mystery collapsed into something surprisingly simple. Service. Sacrifice. Legacy. Then another folded page slipped from the journal and landed on the table. My heart skipped. It was not part of the original notebook. Someone had tucked it inside later. The paper contained only a single paragraph written in my mother's unmistakable handwriting. If Emily ever arrives here, she must see the room beneath the east wing. The key will guide her. Everything else will make sense afterward. I immediately reached for the brass key resting beside me. Dominic noticed. The east wing? Eleanor nodded. There is a lower archive beneath this building. Her expression softened. Very few people know it exists. The room suddenly felt smaller. Every clue seemed to point toward the same destination. Another hidden room. Another answer waiting behind a locked door. Eleanor stood and motioned toward the hallway. Your mother and Sophia prepared it many years ago. My pulse thundered inside my chest. Prepared what? Eleanor's eyes met mine. A gentle smile appeared. Your inheritance. Then she turned and began walking toward the east wing, while Dominic quietly picked up the brass key and followed behind her. Dominic carried the brass key while Eleanor guided us through a quiet corridor extending beyond the eastern side of Whitmore House. The further we walked, the older the building seemed to feel. Framed photographs covered the walls. Smiling families. Students holding diplomas. Volunteers standing beside newly restored community centers. Every image reflected the same thing. A second chance. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating decades of stories preserved in silver frames. Yet beneath the beauty of the hallway, I could feel anticipation building inside me. Inheritance. The word continued echoing through my thoughts. Not money. Not property. Something else. Something my mother and Sophia had spent 25 years protecting. Eleanor eventually stopped beside a narrow staircase hidden behind a wooden door. The entrance looked almost invisible unless someone knew where to look. Dominic exchanged a glance with me before opening it. Cool air drifted upward from below. The staircase descended into the foundation of the building. One step at a time, we followed Eleanor downward. The sounds of Whitmore House slowly disappeared behind us. At the bottom waited another door. This one was simple. Unmarked. A single brass lock rested at its center. Dominic held up the key. Looks like we found its home. My pulse quickened. Eleanor nodded quietly. Your mother insisted only you should open it. Dominic stepped aside immediately and offered me the key. The gesture felt small, but meaningful. Every answer had been leading me here. I inserted the key into the lock. It turned smoothly. As though the mechanism had been waiting all these years for this exact moment. The door opened inward. Sunlight entered through small ground-level windows near the ceiling. The room beyond was larger than I expected. Shelves lined the walls. Boxes, journals, photographs, and files had been carefully organized. Nothing appeared forgotten. Everything appeared preserved. At the center stood a large wooden table. On top rested a sealed leather portfolio. My name was written across the front. Emily Parker. For a moment I simply stared at it. Seeing my name there felt more emotional than discovering any hidden room. Somehow my mother had expected this day. She had believed I would reach this place. Slowly, I opened the portfolio. Inside were letters, foundation records, and a document protected inside a clear cover. The title immediately caught my attention. Whitmore House Future Trustee Agreement. I blinked. Then looked again. Trustee. My gaze moved across the page. The signatures at the bottom belonged to Sophia Bennett, Laura Parker, Eleanor Bennett, and Dominic's father, Anthony Moretti. 4 names connected by one mission. Then I noticed something unusual. One signature line remained blank. Future Trustee. Reserved for Emily Parker. My breath caught. No, I whispered. There has to be a mistake. Eleanor smiled gently. There is no mistake. I looked between the document and the elderly woman standing beside me. I run a community center. I am not qualified to lead something like this. Eleanor's eyes softened. That is exactly why your mother chose you. Silence filled the room. Dominic remained near the doorway, allowing me space to process everything. Finally he spoke. My father used to say leadership is not about power. I looked toward him. What is it about? A faint smile appeared. Responsibility. The answer settled over the room. Not because it solved everything. Because it felt true. I looked down at the signature line waiting for me. 25 years. 25 years of preparation. Planning. Faith. Then something slipped from the portfolio and landed softly on the table. A folded note. Different from the others. Newer. Across the front, written in my mother's handwriting, were 7 words that immediately stole my breath. Open only after you make your choice. The folded note seemed heavier than the entire portfolio. My mother's handwriting stretched across the front in neat blue ink. Open only after you make your choice. I stared at the words while silence filled the underground archive. The signature line remained blank beside me. Waiting. Patient. 25 years of planning had led to this moment, yet I suddenly felt uncertain. Not because I doubted the mission. Because I doubted myself. I looked around the room. Shelves filled with decades of records. Stories. Lives. Entire communities connected by a foundation built on kindness. How could someone like me be trusted with something so important? Eleanor seemed to sense exactly what I was thinking. She sat beside me and gently rested her hand on the table. Your mother asked herself the same question. I looked up. She did? Eleanor smiled. Many times. The answer surprised me. Growing up, my mother always seemed certain. Strong. Unshakable. Eleanor nodded toward the shelf surrounding us. The difference is that she never allowed fear to make the decision for her. Those words settled quietly inside me. Dominic remained near the doorway, giving me space while still somehow making the room feel safer. I glanced toward him. What would you do? He considered the question carefully. If I were in your position? I nodded. Dominic looked around the archive. Then toward the photographs lining the shelves. Finally back at me. I would ask whether I am afraid of failing. And if I am? A faint smile appeared. Then you probably care enough to do it well. The answer made me laugh softly despite everything. It sounded exactly like something his father might have said. The room grew quiet again. I looked down at the signature line. Future trustee. Reserved for Emily Parker. My mother had believed I would reach this moment. Sophia had believed it. Eleanor had protected this place for decades because she believed it. Even Dominic's father had signed his name beneath the same promise. Slowly, I picked up the pen resting beside the agreement. My heart pounded. Then I signed my name. Emily Parker. The moment felt strangely calm. Not dramatic. Not overwhelming. Just right. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. She smiled and squeezed my hand. Across the room, Dominic nodded once. A simple gesture. Yet somehow it carried more approval than 100 speeches. Then I reached for the folded note. The paper crackled softly as I opened it. My mother's handwriting filled the page. Dear Emily. If you are reading this, then you chose without knowing what reward waited on the other side. That means you chose for the right reason. My vision blurred slightly. I continued reading. There is something important you need to understand. Whitmore House was never the inheritance. Neither was the foundation. Those things are only tools. The real inheritance is the belief that one act of kindness can change an entire life. I swallowed hard. The words felt painfully familiar. Because my entire journey had begun with a single act of kindness. A man stopping his car during a storm. A door opening when I needed one most. The letter continued. Years ago, Sophia, Eleanor, Anthony, and I made a promise. If we ever succeeded, we would leave behind doors instead of monuments. Places where people could begin again. You are one of those doors now. Tears finally escaped despite my efforts to stop them. At the bottom of the page my mother had written one final sentence. It was underlined twice. The person who changes your life is often the person who simply shows up. I lowered the letter slowly. The room felt different now. Lighter. Then Eleanor opened a small drawer built into the table and removed a final envelope. Unlike everything else, this one was addressed not to me. It was addressed to Dominic Moretti. The envelope bearing Dominic Moretti's name seemed to surprise him as much as it surprised me. He stared at it for several seconds before carefully taking it from Eleanor's hands. The underground archive fell silent. Sunlight filtered through the small windows near the ceiling, casting soft beams across the old wooden table. For the first time since arriving at Whitmore House, I realized this story had never belonged only to my family. Dominic had been part of it from the beginning. His father had been part of it. Somehow our lives had been connected long before either of us knew it. Dominic opened the envelope slowly. His expression remained calm as he unfolded the letter. Then something changed. Not dramatically. Just enough for me to notice. The same controlled man who rarely showed emotion seemed suddenly younger. More like a son than a powerful businessman. He read the first page quietly before looking down at the second. Eventually he lowered the letter and smiled. A real smile. The kind I had not seen before. What does it say? I asked gently. Dominic glanced toward Eleanor. She nodded as though granting permission. Then he looked back at me. It is from my father. His voice carried a warmth that had not been there before. He wrote it shortly before he passed away. I waited. Dominic continued. He said if I was standing beside the future trustee, then I had fulfilled my part of the promise. Emotion tightened my throat. A promise. Everything seemed to come back to promises. My mother's promise. Sophia's promise. Anthony Moretti's promise. Dominic folded the letter carefully. There is one more thing. He hesitated briefly. My father asked me to remain involved with Whitmore House if you chose to continue its mission. I stared at him. You? A faint laugh escaped him. That was my reaction too. Even Eleanor smiled. The room felt lighter than it had all day. As though decades of unfinished business had finally reached its conclusion. A few hours later we emerged from the archive and stepped back into the afternoon sunlight. The gardens surrounding Whitmore House looked brighter than before. Children played near a fountain in the distance. Volunteers carried boxes toward a nearby community center building. Life continued all around us. Purpose continued. The foundation had never been about the past. It had always been about the future. I stood beside Dominic overlooking the grounds. The silver pendant rested against my collarbone. The same pendant that had started everything. Do you ever think about how strange this is? I asked. Dominic glanced toward me. Which part? The fact that one rainy night changed everything. A small smile appeared. I think about it often. The breeze moved through the gardens. Somewhere nearby, wind chimes echoed softly. For a moment neither of us spoke. Then I looked toward the path leading back to Whitmore House. Families were arriving. Students. Volunteers. People searching for opportunities exactly like the ones my mother and Sophia had spent their lives creating. I finally understood what they wanted me to inherit. Not a building. Not a title. A responsibility to keep opening doors for others. Dominic followed my gaze. Ready? He asked. I smiled. This time the answer came easily. Yes. Together we walked toward the entrance. Toward the people waiting inside. Toward the future. The strange thing is that when I think back to how it all began, I do not remember the rain first. I do not remember the fear. I do not even remember the questions. I remember a man stopping his car. I remember a door opening. And I remember a single question that changed the course of my life forever. Because sometimes the people who rescue us are simply the people who choose not to walk away.